Hello guys, in this video I want to show you on the first VM on my Corp server 1 the DNS and DHCP server role. So we go to our server manager, say manage, add roles and features, say next, next, next. And here we will install the DHCP server and say add features, and we will do this also for the DNS server. We say next, 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 next. Restart if required and install. Now the installation succeeded. Here I go to close and make this full screen, say manage, tools, and okay, this has not refreshed. We go to local server, okay, we should find something like the DNS interface. Now something went wrong, obviously, so I do the last step once again and say DHCP server, add features, and say yes, ignore that there is no static IP on this server. Now continue, next, and here we should find the graphical user interface for these two servers. Next, 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 restart, yes, install. So now the installation has finished. We click close, tools, and first we go to the DNS server. So what DNS does is the name resolution. If we make NS lookup and we go to www.google.com, it resolves the name into its IP address or into all the IP addresses. If we go to NS lookup, we could also enter one IP address, and in some cases we will get the name to this IP address here. So what DNS does is the name resolution of host names, PC names, and all the stuff you need in a corporate network. What you now have to understand is that we have already a DNS server here. If we go to ipconfig -all, we see here that we have a DHCP configured IP address here, and we have already a DHCP server and a DNS server here. But what we will like to do now is to do this on a Windows server here. So we go to the Corp server, say right click and properties. Now here we see on which IP addresses the DNS server is listening on. If you want to, you can limit it. Forwarder here, if you want to resolve a name that is not stored here on your DNS server in your company, for example Google.com, CNN.com, Microsoft.com, it asks the provider's DNS server from your provider and sends then the information to the client. So what we do here now is we enter the IP address of a forwarder. A forwarder could be, for example, Google's DNS server here under 8.8.8.8 and 8.8.4.4. It checks if this address here is working, and then you can click OK. You see that here is the full qualified domain name here of the Google DNS server. We say apply. Then here we have the advanced settings. We don't need this now. Routines are the servers that the primary DNS servers on the first level, I would say, that, and they store, for example, the information which DNS server has the .com domains, and you could also ask this routines if you don't want to use forwarders here. There are several root servers with all the DNS information on the worldwide internet on several geographic locations. So now we let this as it is and say OK. Then we could go to the network center and change our adapter settings here, for example, to obtain an IP address automatically and to use my local DNS server from 127.0.0.1. OK. And now if we use ipconfig all, we will see that we have now our own DNS server here. And for example, we can use nslookup to check it if it works now. The next thing that we would like to do is to create a forward lookup zone. We say right click, new zone, next. We will do a primary zone here, and the zone name, for example, is corp.zz of our network here. For example, if you work for Microsoft, then you would enter microsoft.com, or if you work for CNN, then you would go to cnn.com. So now we want to control corp.zz and go to next, create a zone file, next. Here you can allow dynamic updates. We will do this later on this course. Next and finish. Now you created a so-called zone file. The zone file stores all the information about the DNS settings of your domain corp.zz. What you see here is the name server. The name server is the server who stores the DNS informations, and the start of authority. So we can right click here and say properties, and here we see that the status is running, that it's the primary one. And here we go to name server and we see corp server. This is our server here. WINS is a very old DNS like protocol for Microsoft. We won't use this now. Zone transfer means if you want to sync your DNS settings to another server for backup purposes, for example, you can allow here several servers or any server to back up your DNS information. If we go to start of authority here, we see a serial number. A serial number on a DNS environment is important because if you have a backup DNS server, it has to know when here some data was changed or gets changed. Here you see a primary server, a responsible person, a refresh interval, how often your DNS servers get refreshed with this zone file, retry intervals, expire intervals, and a minimum default interval. Time to live means how long your DNS information here is stored on, for example, a client that asks for a specific DNS record here. The default here is 1 hour. So we say OK here, and we right click here, and we begin with a new DNS entry here. The first is the A record. The A record, for example, I enter here a name, for example, like file server and an IP address. For example, my IP address here that I got here, I copy this and paste it here. Create an associated pointer record means if you have a reverse lookup zone, converts IP addresses into names, and the forward lookup zone converts names into IP addresses, so that you can do this in both directions. You say add hosts. Okay, it can't be created because we do not have any reverse lookup zone. So we will delete this here and go to reverse lookup zone, right click and say new zone, next, primary zone, IPv4 zone, and here we go to the network ID. Here we have to enter our IP address here, 192.168.137. We go to next, 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 and finish. Now we have our reverse lookup zone here with the same entries as seen before. And now we will create here in the forward lookup zone an A record that says, for example, web server and the IP address here of myself. Create an associated pointer record here to resolve the IP address into a name. Say add host. Now the record was successfully created. And now if I go to NS lookup here, I go to web server, for example, and now it won't find anything because I have to enter the full name, the full qualified domain name. So now we go to NS lookup and see webserver.corp.zz, and now it resolves it. If we do the same thing for the IP address, it will work too. If we resolve anything else, it won't work because there is no entry, for example, for file server. If we want to have a file server, we could do the same. Now we will delete this web server entry here, and we will give us a static IP address here. What you enter here depends on your network, on your router and your network infrastructure. So you have to use other IP addresses than here in this video. I, for example, will go to ipconfig all to view this information here, and I will do something like 192.2, for example. We need the default gateway to communicate with other networks, so that if we don't enter a default gateway, we won't come into the internet. A default gateway routes the data between two networks. If you run a DNS server and you set your network interface configuration here, you give the DNS server itself as DNS server here with this IP address. Don't use this IP address here, because if you change your IP address range in your network, it's much easier, because this won't change anyway. So now we say okay, and we will try if it works now. And we will try to reach Google. Yes, Google answers me now. And the NS lookup should work too, but won't work because there is no entry here. So we create a new host record for corp server with our IP address here. Create a pointer record, add, OK, and finish. Now we can resolve the corp server.corp.zz. Also the other way around, if we use our IP address here. If we want to give corp server another name, for example web server, we would create a CNAME or alias record here. Here you point from a name like web server to another name like, for example, corp server. So here you point from corp server to an IP address, and then you go from web server to corp server. So if you ask for web server, it will go here from web server to corp server, and then from corp server to the IP address here. If we do now an NS lookup for web server.corp.zz, we get the IP address here. Here you see that web server and corp server is the same IP address. Here you see that the entry of the reverse lookup zone, we have to refresh it here. Here the IP address points to the name corp server. There are also other types of DNS entries like mail exchange server here, the MX record. For example, here you can say to which mail server your mail packets get routed, and you can specify a priority here, for example, that you say the first mail server is this one and the second mail server is this one. This is used for backup purposes. For example, that you say, if the first mail server fails, please go to the next one. Now I want to show you what happens if I remove our forwarders here. Say OK and apply. And now we won't come into the internet. Maybe. Okay, we come into the internet because it asks now the routines here. So please do not do this in a production environment. We will kill our routines here. Okay, now maybe this entry will be cached. I go to cnn.com. Okay, it works. No one knows why, but it works. But if I want to ping something, okay, this is in my DNS cache. If I want to ping something else, it won't work here. If you want to clear your DNS cache of your Windows machine, you can use ipconfig flush DNS here, and then you can retry it. Okay, no one knows why it works, but it works here. Maybe there is some magic inside. Normally it should not resolve this name here, because this name is in the internet and you do not have any DNS settings that allow this DNS server to ask for DNS entries that you do not manage for your company here. So this DNS server has only the entries for corp.zz. For example, this is your company, and everything else like CNN, Google, Facebook and all the stuff, all this DNS queries will be forwarded to the DNS of your provider, and you have to enter the DNS of your provider here by forwarder, where I used the Google DNS server before. So this is the main reason why you should not come into the internet. So this was now the basic introduction to DNS. Maybe we will see us in the next video again.